Have you ever heard of a child being sold, not for money, but for a mere bag of rice? Abigail was only 13 when it happened. It was on a hot afternoon. The sun scorched the dry ground as Richard and Philomena, a wealthy couple from the city, drove into the village. Rumors had it that they were looking for a child to take in and raise. Johnson and Susanna saw it as a golden opportunity, maybe even divine intervention. They had 5 other children to care for, and food had become a luxury. So, when Richard handed them a large sack of rice and promised that Abigail would live a better life, they agreed without hesitation. Just like that, Abigail was gone, traded like an unwanted item. At first, Abigail thought she was going to live a dream life in the city. She smiled for the first time in weeks. But her joy was short-lived. What awaited her behind the closed doors of that mansion was a nightmare worse than poverty. She wasn't treated like a daughter. She wasn't even treated like a maid. She was treated like trash. Philomena barked orders at her from sunrise to sunset. Any mistake, no matter how small, was followed by beatings or being locked up without food. Richard was no better, silent, cold, and distant. Sometimes, he looked at her with an uncomfortable stare that made her heart pound. She scrubbed floors, washed endless clothes, cooked meals she wasn't allowed to eat, and cried herself to sleep every night. The rich life was a trap. 2 years passed, no school, no love, no hope. Then, one rainy night, Abigail couldn't take it anymore. Her back was bruised. Her stomach ached from hunger. Her clothes were soaked in tears. That night, when the house was silent and dark, she slipped out of the back door and ran. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. All she knew was that she had to get away. Far away. The next morning, Richard and Philomena discovered her absence. At first, they were furious. They stormed around the mansion, yelling her name. But when she didn't respond, panic set in. Philomena rushed to Abigail's tiny room. Her eyes scanned the old school bag Abigail brought from the village. She opened it in frustration and froze. Inside was a small, faded photo of a little girl, barely 3 years old. Philomena's heart skipped. She stared at the picture, her hands trembling, her breath caught in her throat. The child in the photo looked exactly like her daughter who went missing 13 years ago. The same round face, the same tiny scar above her left eyebrow, the same eyes that haunted her dreams for years. Philomena stumbled backward and raced to her bedroom. She tore open drawers, scattered old albums, and finally found what she was looking for, her missing daughter's photo. She placed both pictures side by side. Her hands shook. They were the same child. She screamed Richard's name. And that was the moment everything changed. Richard stood frozen as Philomena held up both photographs, one in each hand, tears flooding her eyes. He took them, stared closely, and felt his knees weaken. The resemblance was undeniable. Abigail was the exact image of their daughter who disappeared without a trace 13 years ago. For 4 years, they had searched police reports, posters, prayer houses. Nothing worked. It was as if the earth had swallowed their baby girl. The pain never left them. They stopped celebrating birthdays. Philomena kept the little girl's clothes, shoes, and toys locked in a chest she never opened again until now. And all this time, she had been right under their roof as a maid. Philomena collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably. The guilt weighed heavy on her chest. How could she not recognize her own child? How could she treat her that way? How could she let her sleep on the floor, starve, suffer? She had punished her own blood. Richard stood speechless, unable to process the emotions flooding his mind. They had to find her immediately. They searched the entire neighborhood, questioned the gatekeeper, asked shopkeepers, and even paid radio stations to make announcements, but there was no trace of Abigail. That evening, they drove for hours back to the remote village where they had first taken Abigail. They reached Johnson and Susanna's house, only to find it abandoned. Dust clung to the walls. The windows were broken, and wild plants had taken over the yard. The couple was gone. They asked around the village until a farmer pointed them to another settlement where the couple now lived. When they arrived, Johnson was outside sharpening a machete. Susanna sat beside a small fire, boiling bitter leaves. Philomena didn't waste time. She showed them the two photographs and asked the only question burning in her soul, "Where did you get this girl from?" The couple froze. Their eyes widened in panic. Silence filled the air. Then, with shaky voices, they revealed the truth. 13 years ago, they were returning from their farm when they heard a baby crying deep inside the forest. At first, they ignored it, thinking it was some trick or animal, but something pulled them in. Hidden among thorns, they found a little girl, barely 2 years old, lying unconscious, covered in strange white powder and blood stains on her feet. There was no note, no clue, nothing. They took her home but were afraid. Everyone in the village warned them to be careful. A mysterious child in the bush could mean trouble. So, they consulted a spiritualist. The old man told them that someone had tried to use the child for a deadly sacrifice but failed. Out of anger, the person abandoned the child to die. But the child didn't die. She survived. And so, Johnson and Susanna raised her as their own until hunger pushed them to trade her for food. Richard collapsed onto a wooden stool. His head dropped into his hands. Philomena covered her mouth, trying to muffle her scream. The truth burned like fire through their souls. Abigail was their daughter, the little girl they had mourned for years, the same girl they had unknowingly mistreated under their own roof. They returned to the city with broken hearts and restless minds. Police were alerted. Flyers went up. Searches intensified, but days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Still no Abigail. Philomena could barely eat or sleep. Every young girl on the street made her heart race. Every sound made her ears perk. Richard, too, barely went to work anymore. His energy was gone. His world felt incomplete. Exactly 3 months later, something happened. On a cloudy afternoon, they were driving to a nearby town for an errand. The streets were unusually crowded, and traffic moved slowly. Up ahead, a large crowd had gathered in front of a supermarket. They were shouting, hitting someone on the ground. Philomena, curious, rolled down the window. At first, it was just noise and chaos. Then she saw a glimpse of a torn dress, dirty legs, and long, messy hair. She looked again, and her heart dropped. It was Abigail, bloodied, beaten on the ground. Philomena screamed. She could not wait for her husband to properly park the vehicle, so she rushed out. Richard ran after her. A tire had been forced around Abigail's neck. Her clothes were drenched with fuel, and they were about to burn her alive. Philomena threw herself over Abigail's body and screamed from the depth of her soul, "She's my daughter. Please, please don't. I beg you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard fought his way forward, his voice filled with desperation. "She is our daughter. Please, we are ready to do anything for her." One of the men shouted, "She's a thief. She stole rice and cash from Mama Joy's shop." "She's a child," Philomena cried. "She's our child." Abigail didn't move. Her eyes were swollen shut. Her lips were bleeding, but she was breathing, barely. The crowd stood frozen. The angry chants dissolved into murmurs. Some dropped the sticks in their hands. Others stepped back, suddenly unsure. Mama Joy, the shop owner, pushed through the crowd, holding her wrapper tightly against her chest. Her voice trembled with anger and confusion. "She stole from me. That girl, she stole rice and my daily sales. Over 10,000 naira. I caught her myself." Richard nodded quickly. I'll pay everything double. It took a while, but the tension eased. People began to disperse. Some were still grumbling, others curious about what they had just witnessed. Richard then settled everything and took Abigail to the hospital. At the hospital, Abigail slipped into unconsciousness. Her wounds were treated, her fever brought down, but her spirit remained distant. For 2 days, she didn't speak. She barely opened her eyes. Philomena never left her side. She held her hand through the night, wept quietly when she thought no one was watching. Richard sat by the window, staring at the girl who had suffered so much. Their own child, beaten by strangers, abandoned by fate. On the third night, Abigail finally spoke. Her voice was faint, her words broken, but they came with pain so deep it pierced the room. I was extremely sick and hungry. I hadn't eaten for days. I slept under a bridge. I begged people, but they chased me away. I didn't want to steal, but my stomach hurt so bad. Tears slid down her cheeks as she looked at Philomena. I thought I was going to die. Philomena broke down, holding her tightly, rocking her like a baby. I'm so sorry. So sorry. Later that day, when the doctors confirmed she was stable, Richard and Philomena sat beside her bed, their eyes swollen from crying. Richard cleared his throat and gently held her hand. Abigail, we have something important to tell you. He handed her the 2 photographs. She stared at them. One was her at 3 years old. The other was a baby with tiny ponytails and missing front teeth. Confusion filled her eyes. Philomena took a deep breath. That little girl is you. You're not just the girl we took in. You're the child we lost 13 years ago. Silence fell across the room. Abigail blinked, trying to process the words. Richard continued, you were kidnapped when you were just 2. We searched for you everywhere. We never stopped. We didn't know you survived. That you were out there suffering. Abigail's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Philomena wiped her tears and held her closer. We're your real parents, and we love you more than words can ever say. The room was still. No one breathed. Abigail looked at the pictures again, then at Philomena, then at Richard. Something in her eyes changed. A distant memory, a familiar feeling, a scent, a voice, it all came crashing back like a wave, uninvited but undeniable. And then she screamed. Screamed from a place no one could see. From years of pain, from days of hunger, from nights spent under benches and behind markets. She screamed for the child that was abandoned, for the girl that no one protected, for the identity stolen from her. Philomena wrapped her arms around her daughter and held her through it all. Richard joined them, and they cried together as a family. Lost, broken, but finally reunited. That night, Abigail slept with a warm blanket for the first time in years. No bruises, no hunger, no fear, just love, a home. The news of Abigail's rescue and reunion spread through the town like wildfire. Some were shocked, others relieved, and many too ashamed to look Philomena and Richard in the eye, especially those who had joined in beating their daughter just days before. Abigail remained quiet most days, sitting by the window of her new room in their luxurious mansion. It was hard to believe how much her life had changed within days. From sleeping under gutters to silk bed sheets. From being hunted like an animal to being protected like a treasure. But the trauma hadn't left. The scars weren't just on her skin. They ran deep into her heart. Philomena and Richard tried everything, gifts, kind words, even her favorite childhood snacks, which she couldn't even remember liking. But Abigail remained distant, her heart still locked in the chains of everything she had endured. One morning, Richard called a family meeting, just the 3 of them. He sat across from Abigail, holding a small wooden box. He placed it gently on the table and opened it. Inside were memories, tiny socks, a broken doll, a baby bracelet with her name engraved in gold, and a small note Philomena had written the day she disappeared. "I kept these," Richard said softly, "hoping one day you would come back and see them." Philomena added, "Every year on your birthday, we placed a cupcake by the window, just in case you returned." Abigail's lips trembled. She picked up the bracelet and traced her finger over the tiny letters, Abigail. Something shifted in her eyes. A quiet storm, a feeling she had buried so long ago, belonging. Then came the second knock of fate. Later that week, Philomena got a call from Johnson, the man who had once called himself Abigail's father. He was weeping. They were in a hospital nearby. Susanna, his wife, had fallen terribly ill, and with her last strength, she had begged to see Abigail again. Philomena was hesitant, but Abigail surprised everyone when she agreed to go. At the hospital, Susanna lay on a fragile bed, barely breathing. Her eyes lit up the moment Abigail entered. She stretched her hand weakly. "My daughter," she whispered. Abigail froze. "I know I was never your real mother," Susanna whispered. "But I loved you in my own broken way. I did." Tears filled Abigail's eyes. Susanna coughed painfully, then looked at Philomena and Richard. "Please forgive us. We were hungry. We didn't know she was yours. We thought we were saving her." Richard's eyes softened. Abigail walked slowly toward Susanna, took her hand gently, and for the first time said something that shocked everyone, "I forgive you." It was as if those words carried healing. Almost immediately, Susanna's breathing steadied. Her chest rose and fell more easily. A nurse entered moments later, checked her vitals, and blinked in surprise. "She's stabilizing," the nurse said. "This is unexpected, a miracle." As Abigail helped adjust the blanket over Susanna, Johnson fell to his knees. "Thank you," he whispered, hands clasped. "I may not deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful." Richard stepped forward and lifted Johnson to his feet. "It's never too late to do what's right." Before leaving the hospital, Abigail did something no one expected. She hugged Johnson. The man who once exchanged her for a bag of rice stood frozen, then slowly wrapped his arms around her, sobbing like a child. Back home, the weight on Abigail's chest began to lift. One morning, she woke up to a strange sound, children laughing outside. She peered through the window and saw a group of street kids being handed food and clothes by Philomena and Richard. They had started a small outreach to help hungry children in the area. "Something," they said, "Abigail had inspired. These kids remind us of what you went through," Philomena told her. "If we can stop even one child from facing what you did, it's worth it." Abigail smiled genuinely this time. Later that day, she joined them outside, helping distribute food. She tied a wrapper over her dress and handed a loaf of bread to a barefoot girl who looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes. For the first time in her life, Abigail didn't feel like the girl who had been sold. She felt like the girl who was chosen for something greater. She looked at Richard, then at Philomena, and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Richard placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You weren't lost, Abigail. You were just waiting to be found." For the first time in many years, peace rested over the home of Richard and Philomena. Abigail was finally where she belonged, safe, loved, and no longer broken. But Richard and Philomena knew they couldn't just close the door on the past. They had been given back their daughter, and they believed it was time to give back to others. The first thing they did was return to Johnson and Susanna's home. This time, not in search of Abigail, but in gratitude. Richard stood in front of the small, crumbling building and looked at the weary couple who had once made a desperate choice for survival. "We came to say thank you," Richard said, his voice steady. "You may not have known Abigail was our daughter, but you took her in when she was abandoned. You gave her a chance to live, and for that, we owe you everything." Tears ran freely down Susanna's cheeks as she held her hands to her chest. Johnson could barely speak. Philomena stepped forward and hugged Susanna gently. "No more struggling. From today, you are part of our family." In the weeks that followed, Richard and Philomena gave Johnson and his family a new house in town and established a profitable business for him. They also got Susanna proper medical care and placed her on a steady wellness plan. Slowly, their lives began to transform. Abigail, now healed in body and spirit, took it upon herself to help children living on the streets. Every weekend, she and Philomena would prepare hot meals and distribute them to less privileged families across town. Richard sponsored school fees for many of them, and a small shelter was built named Abigail's Grace. One day, as they walked through the newly built community center filled with smiling children, Abigail turned to her parents and said, "I want to spend my life being the kind of person I needed when I was suffering." Philomena held her close. "And that's exactly who you've become." The town watched in amazement as the girl who was once traded for food became a beacon of hope. From a life of pain and rejection, Abigail now brought healing and joy to others. Everywhere she went, people greeted her not just as Richard and Philomena's daughter, but as a light that refused to go out, no matter how dark the night had been. Years later, during a community celebration, Johnson raised a glass and said, "We once thought we lost her, but we gained a daughter, a family, and a future we never imagined. God truly works in ways we cannot understand." The crowd cheered. Abigail stood smiling, surrounded by the love of those who once saved her and those she now saved. From brokenness came beauty. From rejection came redemption. And from a bag of rice came a legacy of love. The end. Every life matters. No matter how broken or abandoned a person may seem, they carry value and purpose beyond imagination. A single act of compassion can change the course of someone's life forever. Money and comfort mean nothing if we can't use them to touch the lives of those around us. Destiny cannot be denied. Even when lost, forgotten, or rejected, what is meant for you will always find its way back. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Leave a comment to share your thoughts or experiences. Share with your friends and family. And most importantly, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more emotional, life-changing, and mysterious true life stories that will move your heart and restore your faith in humanity. Thank you for watching.